Hi, you're listening to It Happened to Me, a rare disease and medical challenges podcast. The mission of our podcast is to support you, our listeners, and to create community as you confront the toughest challenges in life. All of us will experience health hardships. The real question is how we adapt. That's the focus of It Happened to Me, which wants to help you overcome limitations and live a full and satisfying life. Drawing on their own health challenges, co-hosts Kathy Gildenhorn and Beth Glassman interview guests who share stories and research to help you succeed in the face of difficult health obstacles. It happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.
Our special guest is Dr. Susan W. Liebman, a trailblazing molecular geneticist renowned for her groundbreaking work on prions and protein misfolding diseases, including ALS and Alzheimer's. Her innovative use of yeast as a model organism has provided critical insights into the mechanisms of these complex diseases, advancing the field significantly. In addition to her scientific contributions, Dr. Liebman is also an author. Her brand new book, The Dressmaker's Mirror: Sudden Death, Genetics, and a Jewish Family's Secret, offers a compelling and personal narrative. It explores the discovery of a previously unknown heart disease gene while weaving in her family's powerful story of love, loss, and resilience.
In today's discussion, we'll dive into Dr. Liebman's family story, exploring the emotional and the ethical challenges surrounding gene testing, and consider the future of genetic screening and personalized medicine. Doctor, welcome to the program today.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction.
And congratulations on your book, The Dressmaker's Mirror. I'd like to pay homage to your niece, and I wondered if you could share a little bit about her.
Karen was a beautiful young woman. She went into modeling. She was doing some acting, and then she got involved in loving French and the language. She went over to France for a while. She had a number of relationships. She had one long-term relationship, married, but unfortunately, within a year, they divorced. And she despaired, my sister despaired. Would she ever have a family? Would she ever find out the right guy? And somehow, precursor of Facebook, she came across a guy that she had known in high school. Actually, he had had a terrible crush on her in high school. He had married and divorced. They were both about 35. They had a whirlwind romance, married, and they were very worried about children. She's 35 years old and 30, was this going to happen? And lo and behold, she gets pregnant. She's 6 months pregnant. They're out at a restaurant on top of the world, celebrating. Her husband, Andrew, is about to turn 37. And as they're leaving the restaurant, she is given a card to rate it. And she starts saying, this was a 10. And she collapsed. And she collapsed on the table. And Andrew says to her, Karen, what's wrong? He already knew. She was dead. She was dead that fast.
Oh my gosh.
She just was dead. They called the ambulance. They were in downtown Brooklyn. They were there within 2 or 3 minutes. They tried to restart her heart. They could not. They asked about drugs. They didn't know what was going on. They took her immediately to the hospital. Andrew got bystanders, found his phone and started calling people, telling them what happened. So his family was there when he got there. His sister.
What a terrible tragedy. I am so sorry for your loss and your family.
Well, he's there and they came out and said, we can't help you, she's gone. And then a few minutes later, they came out and said, I'm sorry, the baby died.
Oh.
They did an emergency cesarean section, but the baby was only 6 months gestation and could not sustain life. So Andrew lost them both that day after being so hard to find them. So yes, she was on top of the world. My sister was on top of the world. We were all thrilled for her, and it ended badly.
Oh, so sorry. Oh. Well, in the book, you discuss the discovery of a previously unknown heart disease gene. And can you walk us through the process of how this deadly mutation was identified in your family, but in your niece?
When someone dies suddenly like that, they want to know why. Did she get poisoned? You know, what happened here? And so there was an autopsy. And the initial results were we couldn't find anything. But when they went further and sent her heart for further examination, they discovered she had what they called idiopathic or no reason cardiomyopathy. Well, it wasn't idiopathic. There was a reason. My sister, 7 or 8 years earlier, had been diagnosed with dilated cardiomyopathy. And when she got sick, you know, the doctors told her it was pneumonia, it was a cold, you're teaching 3rd grade, of course you get sick. And she was not getting better, kept getting sick, you know, kept going on and on. Oh, pneumonia. And finally, I called my nephew, and his wife is a doctor. They came to visit from Boston. She took one look at her and she said, you know, Mom, I think you're in heart failure. You better see a cardiologist. Goodness. She went to a cardiologist, and yes, it was confirmed she was in heart failure. Oh. And the cardiologist said, well, there's been no cardiomyopathy in your family. You haven't smoked for years. You don't have diabetes. This must be, it was caused by a virus. So that's the first I heard of something like long COVID. Your virus got in there and you didn't know it caused this damage. But now, when my niece was diagnosed with dilated cardiomyopathy, it doesn't take much of a geneticist to figure out this doesn't sound right. I think it's genetic. And I talked about it all the time. My sister went for testing with her son, and they didn't find anything. This was a long time ago in 2008. They didn't know very much then. But I started talking about it, of course, all the time. And one of the places I talked about it was in my yeast genetics club in Chicago. And people there knew of one of the members there's wife was a genetic cardiologist, Dr. Elizabeth McNally. And so I became her patient, and she really took care of the family. She collected my sister's DNA, and every few months, maybe every 6 months, she would send it out as more genes were found. And nothing was found. Nothing. Finally, about in 2014, instead of costing $1 million to sequence someone's DNA, the price was reduced to $50,000. Well, that was enough that Dr. McNally could invest her grant to sequence several of her patients' DNA that she didn't, where they didn't know any mutation. And one of them was my sister. I want to say, by the way, while in 2016 it cost $50,000, now it's under $500. So this is like amazing. And you can get even.
It was $1 million?
Yeah. Well, the first one was $1 million.
Unbelievable.
So we've come a long way. And one of the problems is doctors still think it's $1 million. So they're afraid to suggest it, but it's less than 500. I mean, there's a lot of tests we do that are much more expensive. Now I've lost where I was. So she sequenced my sister's DNA. And one of the problems is there's lots of changes in all of our DNA. We all have little mutations here or there that don't do anything, and we're all a little different. It's hard to pick out what's the cause. So she looked only at genes that had some connection with the heart, some likelihood. And she found one, she didn't tell me at the time, FLNC, that affects muscle and is in the heart muscle. And so she proposed that this might be it. But she didn't tell me because she wasn't sure it was true, but she did write a paper on it. Then what happened was other people at the same time and later found similar things. And so it became more confirmed. And there were also use of model organisms. I used yeast as a model organism. You couldn't study this in yeast. It doesn't have that gene, but people studied it in worm. It did have the gene there, and in fly. And so that also helped confirm that this was the mutation.
How does the mutation discovered in your family affect those who carry it? And what are the risks, and how do carriers manage their health with this knowledge?
Okay, so people with this mutation often never know they have it, and they die of something else. So, but if the doctor tested them and checked their heart with MRI and things to check the heartbeat, they might have noticed a rapid heartbeat. The doctor will find something in 90% of the patients. So it does cause something. What happens maybe half the time is that 15% of these people die suddenly, just sudden death. So they didn't know they had anything, and all of a sudden they're dead, like my niece. Some of them, like my sister, get a warning. They get cardiomyopathy, and they turn into heart failure. My sister could easily have died of heart failure because of her misdiagnosis, but she did get treatment. And they put you on, they have beta blockers and various medicines that can help treat cardiomyopathy. So if they catch it early, they can treat it and prevent, I wouldn't say totally prevent, but much lower the chance of heart failure. Also, though, even if they're treating that, you are at risk for sudden death. And so implanting a defibrillator is often recommended, because if your heart does stop, it can restart. If this has happened a lot, that your heart has been restarted, or if there is some damage due to the cardiomyopathy, they also can do transplants. I know a woman who died, and they did a transplant quickly, and she lived. She's still alive 20 years later.
Unbelievable.
So,
wow.
Transplant can rescue you. So those are some of the things that can be done.
So, Doctor, we've talked about family medical history, and this is what your book, of course, is about. And I wonder if you can tell us about genetic testing and what role that plays.
Well, nowadays, we should, I had hoped that by now we'd live in a world where genetic testing would be routine and would save lives. Yeah. Unfortunately, that has not happened. So even without family histories, if someone presents with cardiomyopathy, there's a 50% chance that it's caused by a mutation. But only 1% of these patients are sent for testing, which means that their families are not protected, because they could be, if we knew the mutation, we could test them. So why is this?
Why?
Well, yeah. Doctors still think, and patients still think, this costs thousands of dollars. It used to cost $1 billion. They still think it costs thousands. But really, most patients pay less than $100, and the out-of-pocket maximum is usually $250. Doctors, genetics is a tough course. Doctors remember that class, and they're afraid of it, and they don't want to go there. They think, it's too complicated. They'll never figure this out. They've got enough trouble. Well, really, they don't have to know this. The genetic counselor at the company is going to talk with the patient and talk with the doctor. They think, oh, you smoked, you have diabetes, these things can cause cardiomyopathy. That's the cause of your cardiomyopathy. Well, it turns out 1 in 5 patients who have a risk factor like diabetes or smoking also have a genetic mutation. So that's no excuse to not get genetically tested.
Wow.
Boy,
sometimes people think, oh, I don't want to know. What can I do about it? There's no point knowing. I'll just worry. And the doctors think the same thing. Well, that's not true. We can treat cardiomyopathy and many other mutations. So the American College of Medical Genetics has picked out 81 genes that they fight over every year that are actionable, that we can do something about if we only knew about it. They cause cancer, they cause heart disease, they cause other diseases. There are things in the offing with the genetic revolution that we can actually perhaps not too long from now, use CRISPR or other technologies to actually correct mutations. But that's not here yet. But also, even if you can't correct or treat the mutation, but you want to have a family, you can use pre-implantation genetic testing to look at embryos that are outside of the womb, that are just beginning, few divisions, and choose the ones that don't have the deadly mutation to be implanted. So you can be sure not to transfer this to your children. And also, you're not dumb. I knew that there was a mutation in my family that caused sudden death. I was worried about it. Sure. Finding out that I didn't have it changed my life. So you can get good news from the genetic testing as well.
Well, we've heard how important genetic testing is. I mean, you've made that perfectly clear. And I hope that our audience is hearing this message that don't be put off by high prices. They're not high. And don't be put off about the inconvenience or anything else. Do it. Do it. And so I wonder if you could tell us, you have such an interesting background from your experience. You are a genetic counselor. What was it like for you in your educational process?
So I'm not a genetic counselor. I'm a research geneticist. So I respect genetic counselors a great deal, yes. And I've learned a lot about human genetics from my family history. What it was like for me growing up, I had a very warm and supportive family. They thought a girl could do anything. They encouraged me. They wanted me to be a teacher because they thought that was a secure, safe job where I could have a family and also have a career, and I'd have the days off with my family. But they put up with it. Somehow they sent me to MIT, which didn't have courses in teaching. They thought I'd marry a brilliant man, whatever. Anyway, they were very happy that I was there, and they supported me when I decided to go into research. And they were concerned, how will you fit this in with your family? It turns out with academics, it's pretty easy. And I had a very supportive husband. And everybody I met along the way was very supportive to my career. I can't really complain. The only thing that probably happened was when I looked for a job, I was restricted, but so was my husband. We had to find jobs in the same place. And therefore, I didn't negotiate for a high salary. I negotiated for wait a few months till my husband finds a job. And then I never really knew about negotiating for salary. So it turned out I had a very low salary until one day my husband said, you can look up. So we noticed that I was lower, and I went and complained. And all of a sudden now I had the highest salary because I had a lot of grants and success. And then, so it just took a little asking.
Good for you. Good for you.
But colleagues, I remember when my first child was born, I was slated to teach genetics, and there was no maternity leave or anything. So a colleague of mine, Elliot Spies, was also teaching genetics that fall. So we agreed he would teach my section for that year. And the next year I taught his section. So I had a year where I didn't have to teach, and then I paid him back. And it worked out fine.
Excellent. Well, you mentioned that only a small percentage of patients with cardiomyopathy are referred for genetic testing because of the barriers. As the barriers are breaking down, is that percentage growing? Is it becoming a little more modern in its approach to what's actually going on?
I hope so. There's a lot of people there. There's a consortium of groups that are pushing for this and are advertising and are trying to make a difference. This has just started in the last maybe 6 months. So we'll have to see.
Well, hopefully, as you were saying, with CRISPR and the other innovations coming out, that it'll become more and more possible. I know with my rare disease, it took 15, 20 years before I got to the right doctor that finally ordered the genetic testing that gave my diagnosis a name. And I'm just hoping that you ring a bell here, and I'm just hoping that the world is starting to listen and starting to learn that the sky's the limit with some of this genetic testing.
Well, the problem is both the physician is afraid to do it, and sometimes the patient is afraid to do it. And so we have to break that down. And what I tried to do in the book is show the human face, that if you think it's bad that your daughter might have to wear a defibrillator and that might be disfiguring, and you haven't lost a daughter, you don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Wearing a defibrillator is nothing. Get over it.
Yes.
Right. And the alternative is something
something.
Yeah.
That's the point that humans, we humans have to face.
Get over yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly. Wow. So much to think about. But religion plays a significant role in your book, and you explore the tension between religious beliefs and the fear of social stigma, and how that can negatively impact answering vital medical questions. What is your advice on how healthcare providers can navigate being respectful of people's beliefs while still providing potentially life-saving information?
Yeah, I was there when my father died, and the physician said to my mother, because he died in Chicago, in Skokie, not where he lived, this is a coroner's case, because he died suddenly. And she said, I don't want an autopsy. Autopsies are against the Jewish religion. You can't deface the body. And he said, okay, if you don't want it, we won't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I wish he had said, this could save a life. We're not here looking for, we didn't think you murdered him. We're not looking for drugs. We want to know what happened. Maybe that'll help your children or grandchildren. She would have said, yes, saving a life is much more important. So it's a little bit of misunderstanding of the reason and explaining what autopsy is. As far as hiding things, I think that's true. It's not a religious thing, that's a societal thing, and families in general try to hide bad things. They're smart enough to figure out, even before they knew about DNA, they didn't want their children to be stigmatized.
Right.
So the mutation that we're talking about is prevalent in the Ashkenazi Jewish people. And I wonder what your thought is about anyone who is in that subset group about being tested for this mutation.
I myself would love to see everybody in the world in that subgroup or in any subgroup be tested for the 81 mutations that have been picked out by the American genes that have been picked out by not just one mutation, but any mutation in these genes that have been picked out to be actionable. I don't exactly understand why we're not doing it. I can try to explain. So the idea is because there are mutations, Ashkenazi Jews have this mutation. It shows up in this gene 1 in 800. But 1 in 250 people have a mutation that causes that same gene, same illness. So there's nothing special about Ashkenazi Jews here. Everybody has mutations. They just have this particular one. Others have others. So what the American College of Medical Genomics says is, if you get your genes sequenced for cancer and they come across this heart disease gene that's on this list of 81, you should tell your patient. But otherwise, you shouldn't go out and get tested for it. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So when I tried to understand why, what they say is, we don't have the money to screen everybody. We don't have the doctors to do follow-up for everybody. If you've already been tested, you probably already have a doctor. You've already paid the expense of getting tested, so we might as well tell you. To me, that just means we've got to train our doctors and get the money to do this testing, not that we just don't do it. Mm-hmm. The other more reasonable criticism is that while this mutation causes sudden death in the Ashkenazi Jews, the same mutation in another population might not. We need a little more research. So we might be, a particular mutation that's been found in one family group, in one ethnic group, might have some background effects, other genes in that group that make it more toxic. So that's some research that we need to do, or to just be aware of when we warn people that they have this mutation. I know that American College of Medical Genomics is considering this. They're debating it, and I would like to influence that debate in favor.
There's also so much intermarriage, isn't there, doctor? So it just restrict your testing to one group may be short-sighted.
Everybody's got mutations.
Yes.
Right. All ethnicities. They just have different changes.
Right. So we're all basically the same in our differences. Yes. If you follow
and of course, there are mutations that occur without being inherited. My daughter has a mutation that she didn't inherit from my husband or me. It was just a mistake when she was born. And hers is not that rare. It's hereditary spherocytosis, but that's a lot of the more rare mutations are just a mutation that happens by accident when a person is born. And some of those actionable genes could be found as well if we were screening people, and they certainly are not going to have a family history.
Mm-hmm. So you and Kathy mentioned this gene, the FLNC. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I've never heard of that.
It's a mutation in a filamin C. It's a protein that is in muscle, and it's in the heart muscle. And what's causing this problem is that you don't have enough of the protein. So the mutation in my family and many other ethnicities have different mutations in that same gene that make the protein not work. It kind of destroys, but you still have another copy of the gene from your other parent. So you have half the amount of protein you should have, and eventually that causes this problem. You don't have enough of that protein in your heart to do the job.
And it's amazing that without that protein, that can be the cause of sudden death.
Yes, because your heart doesn't work right.
So for families who have lost loved ones to sudden cardiac death, post-mortem, genetic testing could provide important answers. And however, insurance often doesn't cover it. What policy changes do you think are needed to support families seeking these answers?
But actually, I think that the real problem is that you have to have the remains of the person who died suddenly. You have to have their DNA or you can't do the test.
Right.
That's more important than the insurance. And so one thing I suggest is that people preserve their DNA. You can do that for a few $100s. One company is Securigene. And therefore, if future generations want to test something in your DNA, they can do that.
Wonderful. Can we put the link to that in the show notes, please?
Sure.
I think that would be a wonderful resource.
Secondly, coroners, usually a sudden death is a coroner's case. And coroners need to learn, they're the ones who need to learn how to save remains without destroying the DNA. And the New York City Coroner's Office and Research Triangle Institute have now started a program to train coroners worldwide to save remains in such a way that they don't stick them in formaldehyde, and so that you can still do DNA testing later. I think many of these will now institute automatic genetic testing. There's a panel of 300 plus genes that the New York City Coroner's Office does in a case of sudden death as part of the regular autopsy. Wow. Furthermore, they're going back. They have remains of people 10 years ago who died sudden death that they can still get DNA from their remains. They are doing that, and they have permission, because when you do an autopsy, you have permission to do this. And they have a genetic counselor on board who calls the families who may or may not want to hear about this, but are then being warned that this mutation, it was in your father. You should get your heart checked. So I think we're coming a long way with that. I don't know about insurance. I know that they sequenced my niece's DNA GeneDx did it for free. They used it as a control. But the problem is having the remains. That's the real problem to protect families.
So, doctor, your book talked about this new mutation, and which we've learned about that had horrendous results. What is the status on the discovery of new mutations today? Can you give us an insight into what's happening currently?
Yeah, I don't know that we know precisely, but I tried to look that up, and some estimates say that there's about 100 or so new genes being found a year that affect disease. But a lot of these are not in heart disease or cancer, so there's fewer of those. What I can tell you for sure is that the American College of Medical Genomics in 2013 picked out 56 genes that were actionable, that if you knew about them, you could prevent disease or ameliorate it. By 216, there were instead of 56, there were 59. By 2021, there were 73 such genes, and now in 2023, there are 81 such genes. So it's not a huge number of increase in genes, but we are finding more and more.
Steady
the other
increase.
Thing is, the other thing is that not every disease is caused by a single mutation, by a single gene. There are some diseases that are polygenic risks. So there are things being developed to predict whether you're going to get disease. If you know it's in your family, you've seen it through your family, but we don't have a gene. A polygenic risk can sometimes help you figure out the risks of individuals.
Well, the idea is to keep discovering so we can save lives, so we can alert people so they can be cautious and save lives. So it sounds like we're going in the right direction.
Yes,
Absolutely.
we are.
What perspective do you think might really open the door for patients, but doctors in particular, to be more open to this kind of testing and to get the information about these mutations they need that can save a life?
I like to remind people that they're not hesitant to get a blood pressure test or a cholesterol test. This is no more invasive than that. And it's going to give you information similar to those tests, that you have something. It might, high cholesterol might kill you, it might not, but changing your diet, possibly taking a pill, will improve your chances. Same thing with many of these genetic tests. They will, you spit in a tube, they give you, without costing too much, they give you an answer. You have a higher likelihood than many of having this particular problem. If you get checked, if you get a cancer screen every year, it'll lower your chances of having a deadly cancer, and they'll be able to treat you sooner, or there may be a drug for other diseases. And again, just like blood pressure and cholesterol tests. So try not to think of it as a life-changing thing. It's one of these many tests that we do to help protect our lives. Not only that, the genetic test can do more because it can protect your children.
That's exactly right. All the more reason to do it.
Well, finally, are there any other messages that you hope readers take away from your book, The Dressmaker's Mirror? And how can your story inspire others to be proactive in their own health journeys?
Okay, so very quickly, we've talked about getting a genetic test, allowing for autopsy, saving your DNA. The other thing is, get over it. Knowledge is power. You can't control what genes you inherited. You control how you respond, how you get medical care after that. And we hope that there will be more cures in the future for that. Then philosophically, the book deals with the fact, my father used to say, my bags are packed. When he turned 50, he decided his bags were packed. He'd had a wonderful life. He was grateful for everything he had. He was ready to go. And, life is measured not by the number of breaths we take, it has been said, but by the moments that take your breath away. You've got to
I love
keep that in mind. The other thing is, I came across the 80-year Harvard happiness study. And what makes you happy is not your genes. There's only one thing that really influences your happiness, much more than your genes, and that is your relationships. We can control our relationships, our families, and our friends. Lessons from my family. My father used to say, as I say, he used to say, my bags are packed, but he also told me as a young child that I should learn to be satisfied. We loved Eeyore, in Winnie the Pooh, who used to say, well, there was no earthquake today. And my father would celebrate because there was no earthquake today. He would also tell me, do your best and leave the rest. That's in everything, in studying, in earning money, in finding friends, and also in dealing with your health. You do your best and you leave the rest. That's all we can do. And my sister used to say, and I think she didn't say it for health issues, but I think it's very valid for this. She was a teacher and she would have parents coming in complaining their kid didn't want to play football, or they didn't want to do this, or they weren't reading properly. And she'd say, celebrate your child. Mm-hmm. Find what's good in your child and celebrate it. Celebrate what you have in life, your health, the good things that you have. We all have good and bad. We have to celebrate the good in ourselves and in our families. So those are some of the things I'd like readers to take away that I learned from my family.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, thank you, Dr. Liebman, for sharing your personal family story and the advocating you've done for cardiac conditions. And we highly recommend our listeners read your book, Dressmaker's Mirror. There'll be a link in the show notes to this episode to purchase the book. And we invite you to do so and read it. So thank you again for being a guest on It Happened to Me today, and we wish you well in the future. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So nice to meet you, Kathy and Beth. And thanks for all your work.
Thank you. Thank you.
All righty.
Thank you for listening to this episode of It Happened to Me. We encourage you to learn more at ithappenedtomepod.com. Please use the contact form on our website to submit your guest suggestions, comments, questions, ideas, and feedback for the show. You can also email us directly at ithappenedtomepod@gmail.com. We would really appreciate it if you can leave us a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app like Apple or Spotify. This helps others in the rare disease and medical challenge community find us. It Happened to Me is created and hosted by Kathy Gillenhorn and Beth Glassman. I'm Keir Deneen from DNA Today, and I serve as our executive producer and marketing lead. Amanda Andrioli is our associate producer. Ashlyn Anokian is our graphic designer. And remember, it happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.